In order to start shading, first you need a sprite to shade. If you want to learn how to sprite, I have 2 methods of doing such things. The tutorials for those will be posted right after I post this one. In fact, there are also a bunch of other tutorials online that can help you if either the tutorial that I've made hasn't come out yet, or if it wasn't that helpful to you. Nevertheless, if you have your sprites ready to go, you can start shading. So I'm just going to choose Moltres, or Moltres, however you want to pronounce it, because I need it for the fire that I'm going to teach you how to shade. I'm also going to use Donphan for the skin and the metal, both of which I'm going to teach you how to shade. And I think that's all I need. So what you're going to do is copy and paste the Pokemon that you're going to use, and then zoom in. The first thing that you do is you're going to get the eyedropper tool, right click the color that you want, and then get the eraser and then paste it down onto the whiteness. And then what you're going to do is do this for each shade of each Pokemon, of all the colors that you're going to use, and you're sort of going to make a little table out of it. This is just so you can get all the colors you need and get all of the correct shades. Now you may say that you don't really need to do this, but it helps so that you can see which shades you're going to be using without having to fumble through everything. Now what you're going to do next is fill in the colors for all of the sprites, such as you can see here, I'm filling in the whiteness of the whole sprites with all of this color, the orange, the dark gray, and the gray. Now you may see I copied and pasted Beedrill. Well, I'm just using that for the drill's colors, the drills on the sprite's arms. Also, for the whites that you're going to be using, make sure it's not like the perfect white, such as what you normally see on the paint, on MS Paint, because then it'll just blend in too well, and it will be bad. Same for black, you want to make sure it's sort of bright. Once you get your black, you want to right click the outline, and then you want to left click the outline of the color you want to replace, and then right click the black. When you're shading, you want to make sure that the light source, aka all of the light shades that are like where the sun is coming from, or any source of light, is at the top left corner of the Pokemon sprites. This is because it affects all of the Pokemon. All of the Pokemon sprites are like this. The light source has always been at the top left corner. This means that all of the light shades are at the top left of the sprite, while the darker shades are on the bottom right. This is important because you need to know just how you're going to shade your sprites. If it was shaded a different way, then it would look rather weird. Shading the skin of the sprite is the most standard of all of the shading techniques that we do. Pretty much just put the darker shades, sort of make it curved like you see on the belly of the sprites. And you may see the darker shades on the top. Well, that's because the giant crystal and the armor is covering it up. So just do this for all of the skin. And make sure you do shade everything, because if you don't, it'll just look very unfinished. Also, for shading the skin, you don't really want to use many light colors for it, because when you do use light colors on the skin, most of the time it just looks like the skin is metallic. Unless that's what you're going for, and that the skin is, made of metal, then I wouldn't recommend it. Plus, I'm showing you how to shade metal right now. What you want to do is first go over it with a dark shading, just as I said before with the skin. And make sure that the stuff that's blocking the light, like eye crystal things, are just as it's supposed to do, block the light, and then produce darker shading. Again, remember to have the dark shading sort of curve, like at the bottom right of the torso armor, the Tyranitar part. Sort of have it curve, because if you make it straight, well, it just looks strange. Not really sure what else to describe it, just but strange. You also want to consider factors of like things covering it. Like you may see the left leg of this sprite. You see that it's got some dark shading at the top. Well, that's because the giant drill is in the way. I mean, of course that would cause shade. But unlike the skin, where you don't really want any light shades, you're going to be putting some light shades on your sprites, on the metal part of your sprites, unless you're not really using it metal at all. Then I don't see why this part of the tutorial is even important. But I digress. You want to make sure that the light shade is also in a diagonal fashion, just like the dark shading. You know, when getting the light shading, or any shading for that matter, you're gonna have to redo it many times like I'm doing right now. You may be redoing it right now, like I just did, or you may be going over it in the future, which is what I'm going to be doing. Again, remember to shade everything, because if you don't shade everything, then it will look messy and unfinished. Can't stress this enough, because if you make it look messy and unfinished, then people will not really like your sprite. They'll just think it's, ugh, amateur. Anyways, now we're getting to the sharp, pointy type of shading. First, you want to go over it with sort of a straight line. Now you may be thinking at first, this is sort of contradicting what I've been saying about using straight lines like that. But what you do next is then put a even darker shading in between the two. Then go over it with the lighter dark shading, if you know what I mean. Like a little bit on the dark shading, like a few pixels, just as you see on those drills, so it sort of blends in. Now you may be thinking, well, I guess now I'm the amateur, but Game Freak shades the same way. In fact, that's where I learned this whole shading part from, Beedrill. Thanks, buddy. Too bad I have to delete you. Anyways, now we're going to be shading crystals. Now you may notice here I'm bringing in Tentacle into the fray. Well, this is just for reference. What you want to do is have two shades like that. One big shade and then a tinier shade at the bottom right corner of the big shade. You may want to have it a little spaced out between each other. And also, unlike the other colors, you want to make sure that the round crystal is a dark shade of the color that you're using, and that the light shade is the regular shade of color. What you do is, for the ones in the left hand corner, you want to put in the light shading in between, and then maybe put in the white little shade there for good measure, like I just did. For the different shaped crystals, sort of like that, well, while it's sort of rounded, there's no real technique to do here. It's pretty much just try and do it just like on the crystal, except make it so that it accommodates the shape. You see, I'm using the lighter shade at the bottom of the Metapod shaped crystal, sort of curving, and so is the bright shade. It can be really difficult for even me. Just see what you can do and just only do what you need, what you think is best. Now I'm bringing in Regice, or Regice, however you want to pronounce it, for this part, the diamond-shaped shading, because, well, Regice is a great example on this. What you want to do is, for the middle part, you want to put the light shade of what color you're using in a diagonal format, sort of like what I'm doing. And then for the top left part, you want to make it really light to the point of adding white. What I think you should do is, for parts in which you know already have the shading, like the Sableye that already had the shading before, just use that shading because it's easier and less work. And for the parts that don't already have the shading, like the Tyranitar crystal that I converted into like a diamond-shaped crystal, just do what I'm saying. For the bottom left part, you want to add in the light shading, but you want to add in a little bit of the dark shading as well. And you may also, just like the rounded crystals, you may want to add in the white shading in the middle of the crystal, like I just did earlier. And for the interior outlines, you want to make sure that they're somewhat bright, but not too bright. You want to make sure that they blend in well. However, for the outside outlines, you want to make a little darker, but I'll get into that later. This is just like the inside shading, not really much of the, well, outside. And now for the moment many people have been waiting for, the most difficult form of shading, the fire shading. Just like the rounded crystals, you want to make it the dark shading, but unlike the crystals, this is just to help you, not because that's how it's going to turn out. What you want to do is have the regular shade, the second shade. It's sort of hard to explain, but you want to make it somewhat like the Moltres. I mean, Moltres is a very good example of how to shade like this. I can't exactly explain it, but try and make it look a lot like the shading on Moltres. Except it can be very difficult because of the angle. For the fire that I'm shading currently, it's sort of at a diagonal angle, while Moltres' plain tail thing is going straight up. Nevertheless, you want to try and follow it as much as possible because it will give you the best results. As you can see there, the shading on the fire looks very well done. It looks like Game Freak actually made it. That's just because I copied, per se, the shading from Moltres. And that's just what you want to do. You just want to do this for all of the fire that you're going to shade. Just base it off of Moltres' plain tail, or hair, or the fire feathers. Now that you're finished with the fire and all the shading, the internal shading, you just want to copy and paste the sprites that you're shading. And now it's time for the outline shading. First you want to do the interior outlines, like the little things that sort of stick out. You may see on the Sableye head with the ear thing sort of sticking out, and you may notice I'm adding a lighter shade than black over it, and the same with the crystal. Well, it cracks, so going over it with a lighter shade of the color. So you just want to do this for every internal outline, as I'd like to call it. This may be sort of confusing, but you'll know what I mean. Then you want to do the external outlines, which is pretty much all the other outlines. You want to make sure that the lines don't blend in with each other. What I mean by that is the color is too close to another color. Like for example, the left arm of the sprite that I'm making, the outline for the arm is just a shade darker than the knee. That's better than having it the same color or very similar colors. And for the outline, you may use the sprites that you have used for the outline or sprite that you're currently making, just so you can perfect the shading that you're doing and the outline. It will give you a better idea of what you're doing. But for the general external outline, you want to make sure that it's really what blends in the best. For example, on Sableye's ear thing, sort of the darkest shade for the outline. That's because of the fire there. However, for Sableye's arms, both of them, you see a lighter shading. That's because there's nothing to blend in with. And also you may see that I'm going over the shading from before. That or shading in the outline just like the sprite is. Well, this is very okay because then it makes your sprite better, more professional looking, and it will help you out in those times in need in which you have no idea how to shade. During this shading that you're going over this, you may want to add in some new features such as this orange that's going across the armor. This is not really instructions more than it is just advice to make it look better, because really It just, in my opinion, makes it look better. I don't want to sound like someone who's egocentric or narcissist or anything like that. I just think that putting the outline like that makes my sprite look better. And you also want to make sure that if you're adding in color like I'm doing, you want to make sure that the shading is corresponding with the color that you're putting it on. For example, a light shading is going on a light on the Sableye ear, a light orange is going on a light dark gray, but a regular orange is going on a dark gray, and the dark orange is going on the really dark gray. Again, this is not really helpful more than it is just advice on how to make your sprite look better during the shading process. Also, you may notice, well, for the orange that's on the armor, I'm sort of adding a few dark pixels. This is just to help blend it in. You may notice this on the torso armor, a little bit like those little dots on it, and on the outline of the orange that is on the edge of the outline of the Tyranitar armor. You may even see this on the legs, a bit of the darker orange pixels that are on it, just to help it blend in. These are just instructions on what you're going to do if you're taking my advice about adding in that extra little detail with the orange. It's not much, but it helps a lot, in my opinion. And with that, we are finally finished shading our sprite. I hope you liked this video, I hope you liked this tutorial, I hope it helped you a lot. I also hope that you like this sprite, though that isn't the reason why I showed you this video in the first place. No, it's to teach you how to shade. I hope you found this tutorial to be helpful. Happy spriting!